Welcome to the Orthodox Ethos. Today on the Orthodox Ethos podcast, we're very happy to have as guests Father Tabor Qualls and Adam Lockridge from Mount Tabor School in Kansas City to talk about the foundations of an Orthodox education. All right, welcome back, everybody. We're really glad to have with us today Adam Lockridge and Father Tabor. Adam and Father Tabor, how you doing? Welcome to the podcast. We're very glad to see you. Evelogite, Father Tabor.
Lo Kyrios, good to see you, Father.
How you doing, Adam?
Peter. Great to be here.
Great to have you. What a joy. We're, as you see from other podcasts, and you're one of a bunch we're going to have. We're focusing this summer on Orthodox education, and our goal is to kind of create as much as we can an environment online where we're talking about Orthodox homeschooling, Orthodox schools, and the whole Orthodox principles of education. And so we're very happy to have you who have done the labor, the very difficult labor of starting a school. I want to hear all about that today. Give us some of your wisdom and insights of what was important, what you've learned, and that's what we're looking for to help others out there who maybe want to start a school, others who are interested in learning more about Orthodox education, maybe sending their kids to a school. So that's our aim today, just a good discussion on those principles. I don't think I need to introduce Father Tabor to our audience because, well, he has been on the show, and everybody pretty much knows Father Tabor around Orthodox America. You have a great podcast that you do with. Tell me the names of your coworkers there in the podcast.
Cyprian and Andrew.
Cyprian and Andrew, thank you, Cyprian and Andrew. Cyprian, who's out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean.
That's right.
I think he was one of the few people who got to see the release of. In person of what's his name?
Assange.
Right. That was his island, right? Where
that
happened.
That's right.
That's pretty amazing. So, Adam, why don't you just say a few words about yourself? We know Adam going back, how many years ago now? About 15? Is that right? 10?
It's been a few, yeah. So we met. We met through St. Raphael School, introduced, I believe, by Father Porphyrios, who was
you were our teacher. You were our kids' teacher. You taught Gregory and Anastasia and Panayoti. It was
That's
great.
right, and I just had a chance to catch up with them backstage, so that was really a treat. So, wonderful to see you and your family again. And in the meantime, so St. Raphael School grew over the course of I guess the 2010s. And then 3 years ago, when I heard that St. Mary of Egypt, which is our parish here in Kansas City, was starting a parish school, we moved from the Kansas side in Kansas City to the Missouri side and started attending St. Mary of Egypt. And so for the past 3 years, we've been working to start Mount Tabor School of the Liberal Arts in Kansas City. And I guess to a certain extent, we started a school 3 years ago, but for anyone who's ever tried to start a school, you know that it's, the process continues long after the doors open.
Yeah. Right. I have a lot of questions from my own experience down here in Arizona with three hierarchs when I was the headmaster the first year and a half. And it was a struggle. It's a struggle today for any school on all kinds of levels. So I'm looking forward to asking you about your experience. Before I do that, I want to ask one last question to Father Tabor. How are you doing with your health? And are you fully recovered? Are you back at the grind of the daily struggle of a pastor and a priest?
Yeah, I'm back at the grind. Although I'm not as fast as I used to be, so I don't know if my name applies in the same sense, but I'm limping along, and I just want to thank you, Father Peter, and everybody who has prayed and prayed for me and my family, and even helped me in that time of need. I mean, I'm humbled by the love that was shown to me. But yeah, I'm back serving but I'm limping along like Jacob. I got touched in the side of the hip, and thank God for all the crosses He gives us. So I'm back and trying to get stronger.
Now you're wrestling, not just you're wrestling with God, as it were. That's how we all are. But so you're slower, but you're wiser, I'm sure, through it all.
God willing, I'm looking for that wisdom. So I definitely fear the Lord, which is the beginning of wisdom. So
that's why He's so good to us. But yeah, we were all rooting for you. We wanted to see you down in Alabama. We lost you from Alabama. We were so excited to see you. But it was, we were praying for you, and we're glad you're back on your feet. So where should we start the discussion? Should we talk about maybe just where you started, how you started, why you started the school? Like, what was the decision? Was it kind of a joint thing? Did you go to Father Turbo and say, hey, let's do this? Or did Father Turbo search you out? And how did you all start it?
Yeah, I think really it began like all good things with inspiration from on high. It's kind of an odd beginning, but let me just step back a little bit. My papadi and I, my oldest son's 23. And so my papadi and I, we've been, the gamut of Christian education for, 23, 24 years. And I myself went to a Christian school back in the 80s. And so, I have firsthand experience of being in a private Christian school and the pros and cons of that. And I will just say this, if nothing else, out of respect for, my mother and my father, may God grant them paradise. Even though my parents didn't send me to a Christian school necessarily out of piety, but more out of a kind of a practical desire to give me, education, but also, to some degree an environment, in hoping that I'd be raised and kind of spared some of the, kind of thorns and briars that can happen from public school. So much of the essence of faith that I have now were from seeds that were given to me then. Even though it was an Orthodox context, even though, it wasn't for the best intentions, God still honored the efforts of my parents. And I think I want to start off this discussion with that, is that this has to be understood in the context of, God's mercy and His goodness being so much greater than our understanding. I think it's really important, because if we start off thinking that if we can just get the right program, get the right curriculum, get the right environment, without actually recognizing that unless the Lord builds the house, the laborer labors in vain, we'll miss it. And the efforts will produce a type of frustration amongst the parents. Why isn't this working? Why isn't Jimmy doing better? And what happens is, you're looking for the wrong results. And I think, if nothing else, may God have mercy, but all the hell that I went through, literally, those seeds that were planted, in God's perfect timing, He knew how to water those seeds and to bring fruit. So that's in my context. Non-Orthodox parents, not even really doing anything intentionally. How much more so Orthodox communities, families, individuals, parents who just in hope and faith and simplicity of love make these efforts. I have nothing but trust and faith in that, and I'm living proof of it. So I just want to start off with that. That's my experience. So moving forward, in 2018, roundabout when I became the rector of the parish here, it became really clear to me that the reality of what this community needed was something to really facilitate, greater community, not just people understanding, liturgical worship, on Sundays and the daily services, but it had to be in the home. And that experience of being in the home can only happen through education. Now, understanding my spiritual father, he would tell me people often lose their education because of their schooling, right? And so making that distinction. When I say education, I'm not talking about, kind of hitting the bell, getting in the desk at the right time, but real education, the forming of the soul. So this is the context of what we're talking when we say education, right? And this is important because people will often, I think, conflate the methods and the means for the end. St. Nikolai of Lockridge, he had this correspondence with an educator, and he was basically sharing with him, he says to this educator, you're looking for a system to preserve children from the calamities of the world. He says, there is no greater system essentially than bringing them to Christ, which ultimately means forming the soul. So I think with that understanding, I began to say, okay, what this community needs is to, give more of a foundation by which children can grow and raise and have their souls formed in such a way that when they leave the nest, when they go to college and they go to these places, they don't leave the church, right? Because ultimately, this is one of the key things about education, right? Sorry, Father, you're going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say how, so forming the soul, is the school integral to that? Is it just an addition to that? Is it really essential? Can they go to a non-Christian, non-Orthodox public school and still have their soul formed? Or is this really increasingly in this very antagonistic society, is this really increasingly essential? And or how do you see it? Because some people might say, well, school's just to teach and learn, how to live in this world. The school is about academics. The school is about socialization. How are you going to form? Why do you need the school to form the soul? Or how do you do it in a school? Like, aren't you going to get distracted from the education? These are the kind of discussions I hear going on sometimes among some people who say, well, schools aren't really going to play that role. I mean, why do we need a school for that? What do you think?
I definitely want Adam to chime in this, but I'll just say real briefly, that line of thinking is exactly why I was able to receive some inspiration and direction for what I believe to be from the Lord to begin the school process, because out of my own personal experience, not just in my own life, right? Because when I left that private school, I hit public school, that's where all my problems began. That's when I became a menace to society, right? And I see it in my own life, on my own children, and growing up in the church. And even before we were in the church and the evangelical circles, I know it's going to be tough to hear, but this is why I'm here. That's why we're here on the show today. I am fully convinced that the need for and the future for the Orthodox Church in the States is in Orthodox education, because if we could make an argument for the education system being, neutral, not that I don't think that was ever the case, but if there was ever an opportunity to make that argument, that you can no longer make it. It's evident that the schools are antithetical to what not only God desires for the formation of children, but they're antagonistic towards that. And I think because of that, right, when people make these arguments about public school being a neutral place for just education, that's patently false. Quite the opposite. It's indoctrination. So because of that, I think this is why it's imperative to begin really this work, because it isn't just about, having your kids learning, reading, writing, arithmetic. It's beyond that, because the schools are where children's souls and their minds and their approach towards society, towards culture, towards reality are being formed to the detriment.
What would you say to people who say, okay, so basically the school then is just a negative thing? It's like keep them away from the world until they grow up. Or, okay, if it's not just negative, because it sounds like we're reacting against the world, okay, let's keep them out of those temptations. And now I've heard this a lot too, they've got to be out there because they've got to be socialized. They've got to be tested and, learn the ways of the world so they can learn how to live in the world. This is usually the argument against homeschooling, for instance. Yeah. But I want to talk a little about, and maybe Adam can chime in. I want to talk about a little about, okay, so it's negative. We're not going to, negative in the sense protective, right? It's a defensive mechanism against the world. But how does the school positively also form? That's what you said is absolutely true. And we've got to protect the children, but then we've also got to nurture and form them. So how does the school going to do that? Or how are you doing that? How are you attempting to do that at the school? So whoever wants to jump in first. Forgive me. I didn't want to, presume that.
Go ahead, Adam.
Order. Yeah.
I thought it might be just to kind of like lead up it to try to answer your question directly. It might help to answer your previous question about is my story about how I got involved in Mount Tabor School is a bit different from Father Turbo's, and some of that might help kind of add some context. So I attended a Protestant Christian school as a kid, and then convinced my parents to send me to a public school when I was in high school. And I think a lot of my idea about that was that it would be a better experience. There were a lot more resources. I could be involved in video productions and all kinds of like the bells and whistles that my little Christian school couldn't provide. And I did receive those things, and I'm grateful for them. But I also think I found the spiritual climate of that school to just be dark, and for the education itself, I was looking for like the meaning and the purpose in it. And so as I graduated and I went off to college, I ended up majoring in philosophy and secular philosophy at a public university. And I was a Christian at the time, but I was kind of searching for better answers than the ones that I was being given at church. And that's when I discovered classical education. And so I kind of made a shift from thinking, okay, I'm going to become a Christian philosophy professor to teaching in a Christian school myself. And a big part of the draw for that was, wanting to, a lot of the inspiration I had found in reading the classics and studying history, the things that I thought were really meaningful, and being able to bring those to bear on youth, and give them the experience that I wished I had as a student in school. And the challenge is that a big part of the classical education movement and what inspires it, what motivates it, is this idea of training students up in wisdom and virtue. That's the stated purpose of classical education, which itself is just, of course, radical, revolutionary in our modern secular society. Maybe not in world history, but certainly in our modern society, that would be the stated purpose of education. And then the question, of course, becomes, well, how do you do that? And that's, I think, a big part of what you're, the question you're posing, Father Peter, is like, okay, well, how are we going to form young souls? And, I encountered the work of Dr. James Smith, who's a philosopher at Calvin College, and he read a book called Desiring the Kingdom. He's a Reformed Protestant thinker, and he was talking about how liturgy is the thing that really forms souls. And he didn't just mean like the divine liturgy as we know it, but like just that soul formation actually happens through practice rather than theorizing or thinking about it, or it's like the rhythms of life. And so he uses this thing called like the liturgy of the mall, and he describes like going into a mall as a kind of liturgy, and the icons are the advertisements, and the cashier at the register is the priest who's giving you, so he gives this whole kind of he gives the word liturgy this kind of whole like kind of different philosophical context. And I just found that very like challenging, because I thought, well, how is this happening? Like none of this is happening in school, like we're not really doing the thing that we're trying to do, which is forming the souls. And that's when I first encountered the Orthodox Church. And the first time I set foot in the Orthodox Church, I thought, well, wait a minute, all those things that we're trying to do over here in classical education, like it's already happening here in the church. But when our family,
can you give us an example of that? Give me an example of that. What was the thing that can you point to?
I mean, one of the things we talk about in classical we talked about a lot in, like, I would say, like in the Reformed Protestant version of classical education, we have to have heroes to inspire us. But we don't use the word saint. We don't talk about the saints, and then you walk into an Orthodox church and you go, well, our heroes are all over the walls. They're in our, like, we're singing their praises. We're telling stories about them. They're inspiring our lives. Like, that's, to me, that's the thing that was like the void that we were trying to fill. And it's all right here, but the challenge then, of course, you go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to say, and the whole question of virtue must be at the center of a proper classical education, and at the center of the lives of the saints is, of course, the acquisition of virtue. But maybe in Orthodox you have an incarnate and personal and the iconic model, let's say, as opposed to just examples or less structured or less obvious.
Incarnate versus the abstract.
Yeah. Okay. Forgive me for interrupting. Please continue on.
Oh yeah. So I guess I would just say, I kind of found myself in this position where I wanted to continue teaching and continue in education, but I realized that Orthodox schools are really, virtually non-existent in the United States, and so when we converted, it wasn't like I could just go down the street to the nearest Orthodox school and become a teacher there. And so that's really when I met Dr. James Taylor, who later became Father Porphyrios, and helped him, as St. Raphael School, the online homeschooling program, was getting off the ground. And from the get-go, the idea was that we were going to use this online homeschooling program to try to facilitate the start of these kind of small parish schools. In fact, I love, Father Peter, your book, this this painting on the cover. Thank you for sending me that, by the way. The first time I encountered that painting was from Father Porphyrios, and he showed it to me. And that that image of like the monk sitting around with the children and the in the room, the secret school, I think it's called.
Mm-hmm. It's basically in the churches they would lock the door of the church and go and teach the kids during the church period.
And so this is the image I had in my mind, as we're kind of working with Father Porphyrios, this is sort of what we're working up to. And then when I met Father Turbo, and the first time I came for a meeting in his office, and we're here in this 1890s Victorian house that was owned by the parish, and I walked in, I just felt like I was walking into the secret school, and so
nice.
So it really kind of felt like a lot of what the work that we had done was kind of leading up to that. And so I was really inspired by the vision that Father Turbo articulated and the parish already had in the works, and I just I kind of just walked into it.
If I could, forgive me, Father Buford, because I want to address your question too from my end of the thing, which is one of the things I observed in all our, in our decades of homeschooling our kids was Papati and I observed this disposition that people had of, kind of running away from the world in the wrong sense, fearful. And I think that what we're speaking about isn't about necessarily running away from the world, but it's actually about trying to cultivate the soul that it could receive Christ and develop virtue. Let me give you an example. I'm off to speak about, in contemporary terms, I won't belabor this point too much, but a lot of people coming into Orthodoxy as a reaction to what they're seeing in the culture. That's fine to get you in the door, but to stay here, you have to love Christ. It can't just be about what you're against, and I didn't marry, my Papati's name is Juliana. I didn't marry Juliana because I hated Mary. It wasn't, I didn't choose her because I couldn't stand another woman. And there's people who they approach the church, they approach education, and they'll approach this concept of Orthodox education from that perspective. And I think it's problematic, because I think what it can do is it can, and it does give a distortion, and it gives a type of distortion which makes it difficult for a child to really take in some of the fullness and the power and the majesty, the beauty of who Christ is. Mm-hmm. So for instance, repentance isn't ceasing bad behavior. That's only part of it. It's only until you begin to pursue virtue that you're in the regenerative grace of repentance. It's the same thing with education. It's not just enough to say, this is what we don't do, this is what we don't like. Well, you have to actually say, well, this is what's beautiful. Part of the problem is that we have these ideas, and the church will help kind of excise these ideas if we allow her to. But the reality is, a lot of us have this idea that, well, little Joni and little Jimmy, just kind of set them where they need to be and they're going to figure it out on their own. That's not true. You have to help it. You have to teach a child virtue. You have to instruct a child in what is good and what is beautiful. You have to instruct them. And so this is part of the forming of the soul, which is helping them to develop the faculties of their inner person, so that they can begin to perceive the beauty and the wisdom of God. And if you only curate their experience in such a way, then what you're going to run into is the same problem you run into with, Saint Joseph and Barlaam, right? Who Saint John Damascene writes about in the Pearl of Great Price, right? Saint Joseph and Barlaam, Yosef, this Indian prince who's locked away, in the tower, and his father's trying to keep him from death and from suffering and all these things. And he begins to kind of yearn and seek to understand life, because in that curated experience, he recognizes that something isn't correct, something is off. He eventually travels out, and by God's providence, he encounters Saint Barlaam, the monk, who begins to catechize him and instruct him in the world, and begins to teach him properly about death, about suffering. And it's in that his appreciation and his ability to comprehend the vastness and the majesty of God begins. And this is not too different from the life of Saint Barbara, who's locked away in the tower by her father, right? But it is longing for more. See, the thing is, it's not about keeping the child from the reality of the world, but rather forming them in such a way that the wisdom of God is permeating every aspect of their being. That's why praxis is just as much a part of Orthodox education as it is the kind of formal pedagogy in regards of writing, doing reports, all that. It has to be incarnational. It can't just be a cerebral exercise, because that's not orthodoxy.
You mean you can't just teach them the theology of the cross and not teach them how to make the sign of the cross like that?
It can't do it. It forms these distortions, right?
Yeah. It's a head trip, and it's not a practical help to them.
That's right. So, for instance, for us from the beginning, it was very clear. When we began, there was a core. There was 3 of us who were a core that were doing work. We're looking at other schools, charter schools, Orthodox schools if they existed, looking at classical education, liberal arts schools, looking at all these various expressions and models of education, and trying to see what worked, what didn't work. And very early on, it was clear that one of the key things was that, like, the liturgy, or to be more specific, a liturgy had to be part of the actual experience. So every Wednesday, there's the school liturgy, right? That's central to that experience, because that day of liturgy and of catechism and of instruction in choir, that is radiating out forwards and backwards, trying to touch on points at the beginning of the week, at the end of the week, and really it's facilitating relationship. It's facilitating not just relationship of the kids to one another outside of the classroom, but it's facilitating relationship of them and God, and trying to make these connecting points, connective tissue, so that their experience of the liturgy, their experience of the church, isn't just something abstract and kind of only behind the walls of the church. This is why the school's so important, and it's an imperative, because the school functions in such a way to help flesh out what they're experiencing, not just what they're learning about, but what they're experiencing in the liturgy, what they're experiencing. For instance, boys getting in tussles. Guess what? Boys get in tussles. So what do? Right? How do you take that? Because in my mind, 2 boys getting in a tussle, yes, that's problematic, but it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for them to actually take some of what they learned in the liturgy, right, and to apply it in such a way. That's that socialization. You see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's not about running from these things.
So first of all, let's just let's make a list here and start checking them off. You can't have an Orthodox school without the Divine Liturgy. You can't, therefore, have an Orthodox school without a priest, and probably a parish community. I mean, if you're going to talk about an Orthodox Christian school today, you just put the liturgy at the center of everything. So that means it's basically the community and the priest, correct? I mean, you can do academics in a theoretical Orthodox way, but it really is half the job. I mean, we haven't done the full job. You got to have the liturgical life and the parish life.
And Father Peter, I'd like to jump in here and say, because I know Father Turbo won't say it, but St. Mary of Egypt, our parish in Kansas City, is a unique parish. It's a healthy parish. It's a vibrant parish, and I would say parish life is so critical to this formative aspect of the education that we're talking about, because it isn't just, it isn't, just about the curriculum in the school, which, as some, maybe parish school skeptics might say, well, why do you even need, why can't you just, send them to public school to learn their grammar or whatever, but who are those teachers, and the thing is, and I mean, in our parish, we have, faithful parishioners that our kids see on Sunday at liturgy, who are then showing up on Monday morning to teach them their lessons. And it provides this like continuity of experience in their lives and that kind of grounding in their lives.
Adam, would you say after the priest, the most important element is going to be the teacher?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Before anything else, before curriculum, before buildings, before whatever.
Yeah, who are you hiring to teach in your school? I think is it's of the utmost.
Yeah. So I think I wrote somewhere in the book that you mentioned that we just released that what's going to remain years later. I mean, that's certainly true with my kids. We just talked about this with you. Is the relationship with the teacher and the impact of the teacher guided discussion of the literature or whatever it might be. The most important factor there is who's teaching and how they're teaching, not so much the particular points that are made or not made or skipped or forgotten but that's that, and that makes total sense with our theology and our spiritual life. That's going to be the top of the list.
And just to add one, I think, important clarifying point is, because working in the homeschooling world, like I'm very sensitive to the fact that, like, in a lot of cases that teacher is the parent, like a parent in a homeschool setting. But in our case, in an Orthodox school, it isn't just about having sort of like an expert or a sage on the stage, so to speak. We got to bring in the professional teachers. It is just about the many different relationships that you have, and like the relationship between the teacher and the students, and having those people who aren't your parents in the lives of your children. And as a dad, like, I know how important that is to have people who aren't me, who are influencing my kids, who are speaking truth and life into their lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. What do you think is how do you integrate into the school the Orthodox Christian vision academically? Is that something we should discuss, or what's the next thing that you would say is on the hierarchy is key to making a successful and a spiritually successful school? Is it then what we're teaching and how we're teaching it, or is there something else that you would go to then next?
Father Turbo, you wanna?
Well, I think with those things, I don't know if it's so much a next point in regards of kind of a linear hierarchy, but no pun intended, but there's the key thing with all this is that there's an ethos that's kind of running through everything. And
we agree with that. We like that. That's a good thing.
No pun intended, right? So for instance, let me kind of speak to something. It's important that the context in which the children are receiving education is done in such a way that they don't, you want to remove the dichotomies, because the dichotomy of my school's over here, my other life is over here. What that's going to do is that just many of us have this experience of education where you went to a building, you were force-fed a bunch of facts, you had some okay experiences, probably a lot of bad ones, and you're just kind of glad that you escaped by the skin of your teeth, and you don't really remember anything. And you got just enough to get a piece of paper so that you could get a job that you hate. That is essentially people's experience of education. What we're trying to do is to give an ethos to where that is not the case. What we want to do is we need to have teachers who also understand that not just what you're presenting in, but how you're presenting it to the child matters. Because I want, we had this conversation once, what's the ideal student graduate from Mount Tabor? I was like, my ideal student is a kid who ends up being, a plumber, right? Who raises his family faithfully to go to church and actually, enjoys being able to talk about St. John Damascene with maybe his oldest kid, or maybe, you see what I'm saying? That his life is integrated, and that integration also means that he sees the value in him being a plumber. That he begins to understand life on a holistic level, that he wasn't, habituated. He wasn't, programmed to think that whatever he does with his life, if it isn't a certain type of, exciting thing, that his life is worthless. Quite the opposite. Right. And that's one of the things about education of the soul, is that when you teach a child the value in, I know this is difficult, and I know that, you reading, the Odyssey is not really fun right now, but I guarantee you working through this is going to play out when you are having to work through, dealing with a client, whatever. This type of understanding is imperative. It's imperative that you have teachers who have gone through the gamut themselves and seen the pitfalls, and aren't just trying to help them to avoid the pitfalls, but trying to show them, no, your life can and should be beautiful, irregardless of what you're doing, occupationally, because your vocation is actually to be a Christian in the world. So your vocation as a Christian in the world means that you are able to see the purpose of beauty. And that beauty just isn't something that's pretty and dazzling, but that beauty informs, like, hey, if you're a carpenter, you do your work well. You work well unto the Lord. And you learn the ability to work well unto the Lord, even when you don't feel like it, those years of writing that report on the Odyssey, right? All that matters. We can talk about Hellenic culture. We can talk about how that ties into, how Byzantine experience. We can talk about all those things, but ultimately what's going to matter is we're teaching the children how to live life in a God-pleasing manner. And that God-pleasing manner also means looking at the sum total of their experience. So all that being said, I think a big part of that too is how you craft the environment. Do you, in our school, it isn't just about having, a couple icons, kind of strategically placed in on the walls. It's about actually creating an environment that allows a child to say, okay, like, this is special. The same thing that happens when you enter into the temple, right? This is different. And forgive me, this is going to drive some people crazy maybe, but I would even dare say you want to strive to create an environment of holiness in that school. St. Theophan Recluse, he says, of all the holy works, the most holy is the education of children. This is St. Theophan. So that isn't just abstract. It has to be incarnation.
So after the divine liturgy, the teachers and the spiritual guidance, the ethos is extremely important, how it's communicated. So when I think of ethos, I think of the words of the Lord, that I am the way, the truth, and the life. The way is more or less the ethos. The truth is the dogma. These things are inseparable: dogma and ethos, truth and the way. And so the ethos is communicated chiefly by example. People look on the saints or on the priest or on the presbytera or whoever it is that's guiding them and teaching them, the teacher. And as much without words as with words, or probably without words, they're getting that ethos. They're learning the way of Christ, which is, ultimately without that way, without that ethos, the dogma remains, dead on arrival. I mean, in terms of like transformation of the human being, right? So it remains an idea, and we turn Christianity into an ideology.
Right.
But without the way, I mean, I think that's the biggest challenge generally in America in Orthodoxy is where are the examples? Where's the flesh and blood holiness around me that I can then imitate, inspires me and guides me in ways that I don't even realize intellectually, like academically or rationally. I don't even maybe calculate or make conscious computation in my brain. It just happens. It's like osmosis. And so I guess what I want to say is that's the most difficult thing to impart, right?
Father,
and it's got to be done just by example mostly.
Yeah. Something I want to add too, forgive me, Father, I think this is really important. This just kind of hit me as you're talking. This is going to be, for some people, it's going to make a lot of sense. But again, for some people, it's going to kind of have some dissonance, but that's a good thing, right? Because it means that dissonance shows that there's something that you need to learn, there's something you need to understand and work through, okay? And what I'm going to say now is what's also very important is that it can't operate. The ethos has to be aware and sensitive and really avoid rigidity. Because when people hear dogma and these things, they think rigidity, and it's quite the opposite, actually. It should be seen as stability. Stability and rigidity aren't the same thing.
Well, it has to be natural. It has to be almost unstated. You don't like point it out. You don't. That becomes a pietism then. It becomes externals. Yeah.
One of the things is there's a seamlessness that we're striving for. Again, removing the dichotomies, right? There's a seamlessness that we're striving for in regards of they understand that their instructors are human beings. They understand that their instructors are Orthodox Christians. They understand that isn't something that's kind of like put on the shelf. They understand that life happens. So, for instance, part of that ethos is it's imperative that the headmaster, it's imperative that the educators have a degree of fluidity, flexibility to their approach, because there's going to be moments where I'm very big on this one. There's going to be moments where you're going to have this really wonderful opportunity to educate the child, but you may have to sacrifice some schooling. There may, just like I was saying earlier, there may be a period of time. It's like, you got a class of, lower grade kids, and like, it just, everyone's got the ants, they're antsy, they can't move, whatever. The teacher has two choices. He can look at his watch. He can think about, well, this is what I needed to get done for my lesson plan. Or he can say, you know what, let's go outside, right? Let's take a moment. And then you have this discussion, let's say, about the prologue that day, right? And you have to be willing to take those moments. You have to be willing to take those moments sometimes, and instead of trying to, smash the square peg in the round hole.
Right.
You have to be willing to make room for Christ, to make room for the Holy Spirit. And that's something you cannot do. That's the value of homeschooling. That's the value of an Orthodox education. But you cannot do that outside of that context. And I would say that's one of the things that very quickly can, squelch the spirit of a young soul.
So let's talk about these souls right here. These are the souls you got at the school, right? This is the ethos. I wanted to actually get some flesh and blood in front of us as we're talking. I love this picture. It's a great picture. This is the school in the background, right?
Yeah.
And there's Adam up here in the far right. And you got some sisters here from the local monastery. They teach also at the school?
Correct.
And this is the student body. Are we missing anybody? Nice. It's a family.
I don't think Father Turbo was there that day.
Yeah, Father Turbo was there that day. But he's just up above though.
I'm taking the picture.
Yeah. There he is. He's the main man, and then we go to the.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. So it's a family. Like what you were talking about is you can't be this rigid, impersonal, institutional. We got to get everything, we've got to reach this in the book. If we don't get to that line in the book, then, we've not succeeded as an institution this year, blah, blah, blah. You're talking about, it's got to be like very personal and family-like.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's probably a good chance to say too, Father Peter. I mean, I was emphasizing the central importance of the teachers, which I would stand behind that. But I would also say if you asked a family in our school, why do you send your kids to Mount Tabor school? They might mention the teachers, but they would just as soon mention the other families in the school, and really that's what we are, is we're a community of families who are, educating our children together. I have my own children in the school. Our other young teachers have children who will soon be in the school. And so there's, we're all kind of invested in this project together. And so I think that family component of it is critical.
16 families. Are they all parishioners, or do you have people coming from outside the parish?
Other parishes as well. So, in fact, we have 4 and perhaps soon to be 5 of the local Kansas City parishes represented in the school.
Nice. Are you growing?
I would say, yeah, slowly but surely. I mean, we were fairly stable the last couple of years. We have, and there's probably some other things to share, just general things about the school. We're a micro school. This is a term that, I think kind of came out of 2020 and the pandemic era of these kind of intentionally small schools. And so we don't really ever intend to grow beyond maybe 50 or 60 students. It'll stay kind of that size. We're a hybrid school, which means we have multiple options in terms of the weekly schedule. So the students can be, they can be on campus 2 days a week or 3 days a week or 5 days a week, depending on.
I see that also at Father Josiah's school down in LA. That's what Mark Tarpley kind of does with his people down in Texas. Mm-hmm. Is they've got a choice and they've got at least 2 days a week at home. I think it's part homeschooling. Mm-hmm. Is that how it is with you guys?
The third year of the school, this last year, we transitioned to that model for a couple of reasons. And so our academic days occur 2 days a week at the schoolhouse. But we simultaneously started an enrichment program. People call it the parish day because it takes place at the parish. And the goal was to emphasize, they have like study time in the morning at the parish that's supervised by a tutor. And then in the afternoons, we emphasize what we call the common arts as opposed to the liberal arts. The common arts used to be called the servile arts, but that's not a super popular word for understandable reasons. But they're the arts of service. They're the way that we serve one another as Christians. And so they're learning, the handicrafts, and they work out on the farm. We have an urban farm, the George Washington Carver urban farm. And so on alternating days, they're able to go to the parish. They work with the convent of the Mother of God, Seeker of the Law. So the sisters teach them home economics. And so they have a really rich kind of enrichment program on alternating days when they're not at the schoolhouse.
I love that. So a lot of practical, hands-on, how to live, how to keep a house, how to keep animals, things like this.
Mm-hmm. Right. So if a family wanted to homeschool, on the opposing days, they could do that, and then they would be doing those types of things at home, or they can get them on the enrichment days.
Oh, so there's an option. They can stay home with their parents, or they can go to the enrichment.
Yep.
That's awesome. That's great. So you're the headmaster, right? That's your title. And you've got a staff. Yes. You've got a staff. It looks like you've got a director of operations, an academic dean, assistants, etc. A lot of different. Should we put that on the screen? You can tell us a little bit about that. Hang on a second. Tell me about the structure, because I think this is also, if we're going to talk about schools, even though it's low on the totem pole, right, in terms of priorities, like I think what we said earlier, the who's teaching, the ethos, but you have a structure here. Tell us about the structure that you've given and why these roles are important?
Yeah, so we have five, I would say five paid employees, full-time employees. And but then, in addition to the people you see here, we also have the support of, parents who are serving many different roles, coordinating events and planning and helping with the fundraising and that kind of thing. So those are some faces that are very involved that you don't see up here. But in terms of just the ones we're looking at, so you'll see Ian and Peter, or Ian Flowers and Peter Bradshaw. So Ian has been in the parish longer than any of us. I think even before Father Turbo, if I'm not mistaken.
Correct.
And so Ian was a teacher in the local public schools. Special education was kind of his emphasis, and so he's been help starting the school from the ground floor. He actually lived in the house for a time where the school now meets, and helped to renovate it the summer before the school started. So he's been very heavily involved. Peter Bradshaw worked with me at St. Raphael School. He was actually living in Egypt when I first met him, and so he came to teach Greek at St. Raphael School, and we got to know one another. And so he moved to Kansas City a couple of years ago to teach at Mount Tabor. Jackie Flowers is married to Ian Flowers. She's the choir director at St. Mary of Egypt, and so she's also been around since the very beginning. And let's see, the sisters have a variety of roles, but Sister Glycaria is our one of our full-time faculty members, and she teaches primarily the early elementary. And then you can see the others are involved in some the enrichment programs, and Basil Gibson is the one who coordinates the Common Arts days that I was mentioning.
So who's in the classroom on a daily basis? How many of these are your teachers? Do you have other teachers that aren't listed here?
Yeah, the ones kind of towards the top. So that would be me, Ian, Peter, Sister Glycaria, and then the ones below that are either kind of more part-time or not in the classroom, depending.
Okay, so you don't have a huge staff because are you doing multiple years together, like first and second together, third and fourth together?
Yeah, that's right. So that's kind of part of the idea of the micro school model. You could think of it like almost like nested one-room schoolhouses, where you have combined ages. And so it isn't, you don't have all the K through 12 in one room. In fact, the upper school and the lower school meet on alternating days. And that's part of the secret to being able to employ full-time teachers, because you can have the teachers teaching different cohorts on different days. And so all those teachers are teaching all day, every day. But the students are not necessarily on campus every day. So it's different.
Some people might say, well, you're just not going to meet your goals. You're not going to get enough work done. They're not going to learn enough. Like it's quantity wise, you're not going to make it. Is that a concern, or you think you do it anyway in a different way?
I've heard those families that are maybe used to more of a 5-day a week school. I've heard that question come up, as you and I know, as like homeschooling parents, there's a lot of ways to get it done. So, I think having been a teacher in a 5-day a week college prep private school, I can tell you that even if you have class 5 days a week, you're not spending all of that time directly instructing the students. They have work that they're doing. They're sitting and reading quietly, a day or two a week. So, really the idea is to try to restructure the week rather than reduce so that the instruction is really focused. And when they get a full day of instruction a couple days a week, and then they have, and I always clarify with a hybrid school, it's a 5-day a week program with options for, which days you're attending, because they really do have 5 days a week worth of schoolwork. It's just some of it is happening either at the parish day or at home.
So at home, when they go home, they got homework to do, and their parents are going to be there with them, and they're going to be working through it with their parents.
That's right. Yeah. Exactly.
Okay. And what other aspects of the school? Let's talk about what errors, what mistakes you've made that you learned, and what have you changed that you were doing that you said, well, that's not going to work. Let's do this different, or anything like that. Insights into people who either are doing schools or thinking about doing schools. What would be your advice to them? What have you learned over the last 3 years?
Father Terrell, you want to go first, or?
Oh, you can go first.
Let's see. What will we do? What will we do? Change or do differently? I mean, well, I think
Put you on the spot.
Well, I guess it's one of those things where it's like hindsight is 2020, and so it's just been such an evolving process where I go, there are things that we've changed, but I think there are also good things that kind of came out of some of the decisions we had made. So what I'm thinking of is, for example, the first 2 years of the school, we did a full-on 5-day-a-week program for everyone. And I think that may have actually been a good thing for the first 2 years. I think the students really grew together as a student body. You really have to have a student culture. They have to know one another. They have to be friends. They have to respect their teachers. They have to get used to being in school. We brought in when we started 3 years ago, we had kids coming from charter schools, from public schools, from homeschooling. And so they have all of these different experiences that they're bringing to the table, as do the teachers. And so, I would say it took all of 3 years for us just to become a school. So in a way, I'm very thankful for those, really jam-packed, days and weeks, the first 2 years of the school, because I think it really kind of formed us into a real school. But I'm also glad that we've kind of moved to this hybrid, structure where it allows for a little more breathing room, allows for a little more life and, variety being the spice of life and all that. So I definitely, so I guess to answer your question, I would definitely advocate for that structure. And I think it's been an improvement, but I also I don't regret the first 2 years either.
How about you, Father?
I don't know if I would say, because I'm on board with Adam, because part of the ethos is that everything is given to us by God for the betterment. So everything was necessary. I can say one thing that I feel I feel very strongly, a strong conviction, and maybe for better or for worse, maybe even Adam might comment on that, but I have felt. I've always known that there is going to be challenges to straying from the vision. And the vision, the ethos, right? Again, no pun intended, but there's going to be challenges to that, especially if you're dealing with, a situation where it's not just a parish school. You're dealing with other parishes. You're dealing with people maybe not from the Orthodox tradition. And so the temptation is going to be to lose your foundation, to kind of like lose your moorings. And I think, to the chagrin of some people over at times, I have been just very resolute about that, about not leaving what I know I need to kind of like hold my ground on, right? That foundation.
Can you give us an example? Oh, what would that have been?
I'll just kind of go there. I hope it works out. But
let's go there. Let's go there, Father.
Let's just go there. I think that's what people want to hear. Listen, you're going to have a spectrum. This is just a reality. You're going to have a spectrum, whether it should be or shouldn't be. That's not we don't need to discuss that here. But you're going to have a spectrum of opinions on things, within various parishes and jurisdictions. Let's just be frank.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. And so the reality is, I run my parish is my home, it's my flock, it's my children. And so it needs to be kept in such a way that, as for me and my house, we will honor the Lord. We will serve the Lord. Right. Yeah. And so things of issues of sexuality and gender, right? Like, these are things that you have to have, from my perspective, an Orthodox approach on those things. And if you seek to try to capitulate on some of them for the sake of, wanting to appear a certain way, you're going to endanger the core foundation of it's like letting the weasels into the chicken coop to some degree. That's like you're asking for problems. Another example that I'll give is, there's some people who they just have more, kind of Enlightenment ideas, egalitarianism in regards of how structure should be. And there are people who, part of what you're kind of honing in on, Father Peter, in regards of there's the priest, the pater, there's the priest, and that priest is very much the father of the community, and there's people who they find that problematic. And so one of the problems is, for some people, they may feel that the school's tied too much to my personhood. If some people think I'm too strict, or if they think that I'm,
If Father, if they don't think you're too strict, you're not strict enough.
I'll take it, Father. I'll take it because
in this day and age, it's like the number one first thing out of the gate is, why do we have to do X?
Yeah.
Why can't we just be like the rest of the people around us?
And that is a real thing. And so, for me, it's never a thing of, it's not perfunctory. I don't just have knee-jerk reactions, but there's just there are things that, you approach almost as like dogma. And it's not that it's a rigidity, but it's an understanding of, this is our foundation. And so I would say that that's something that I feel is very important, because if you begin to compromise on some of those things, you begin to really lose yourself. So that being said, I think that facilitates the flexibility. Us moving to a hybrid model, it wasn't that big of a deal because the core things are solid. See, that's the thing people don't understand. When you're solid on the core foundational things, that's why rigidity doesn't work. I'm from California. And one of the things about the design and architecture of certain buildings, right? The good ones that withstand the earthquake, they have a little bit of sway, because if it's too rigid, the building will crumble. So it's the same thing. That foundation is absolutely solid. And with that solid foundation, that allows for a little bit of sway on things like, the kind of day-to-day structure and things like that. And even playing around with, how are we approaching curriculum? These are things that are not the core thing from my perspective. And I think that's one of the things I would share with people is, people will end up spinning their wheels, and what should have took maybe 2 to 3 years to get off the ground can take you, 4 to 5 years, because you're spinning your wheels on curriculum. Curriculum isn't the thing that you spin your wheels on. You spin, that's something.
Well, is there even an Orthodox curriculum? I mean, you're forced to pick and choose. There's no way around it. We don't have a full-on Orthodox, 9 to 5 curriculum, do we, Adam? I mean, does it exist in English?
You're correct. Yeah, no, we do not. And just to maybe add to what Father Turbo is saying too, I think very, very early on when I first came to Mount Tabor School, I think I was more sympathetic to this idea of a pan-Orthodox independent school, and I became very convinced quickly that a parish school is really the only way to go. And I mean, one of them is just a practical reason. Being even at St. Raphael School, for example, just trying to figure out how to do the calendar when you're dealing with, this, we're saying this is the most important part of our school, that we're, commemorating the saints and but we don't have the same days. And so how do we set up the calendar to even make it work? And so that's just one kind of,
we have Meletios Metexakis to thank for that. Anybody who knows history, it's my joke. Yeah.
Well, one example of a host of things where a school can very easily just become a tug of war in the jurisdictional or in the parishes thing. So I think early on, just the fact that we're a parish school, but we're open to other parishes, I'm very happy and proud of the fact that we've attracted families from numerous parishes across the Kansas City area, and they're happy and flourishing at our school. But I will say, if you want to hear some war stories, I mean, I'll give you one. Our first year is
we want some spicy stuff.
Okay. So, my first summer, getting ready to start the school, I had a woman in the community come and meet with me at the school and wanted to tour the school, and she wanted her daughter to attend the school. And I introduced myself and she introduced herself, and we kind of got to know one another. And she let me know that she's a third degree Wiccan priestess, and she wanted to send her daughter to our our school. And after talking with her, I thought, well, okay, I mean, you know what we are as a school, as long as you're okay with us teaching her to be an Orthodox Christian, then let's, fine and good. But, about, I don't know, 6 months or so later, maybe less, we had a conversation, and she said, I really think you're grooming my daughter to be a Christian. And because, she was making the sign of the cross, and she's singing the hymns. And I said, I just want to take exception to one thing you said there, which is the word grooming, because that implies that we're doing this in secret. Like it's right on the, it's right on the sign, like we're a Christian school, and I mean, it's kind of in hindsight, I mean, she was a lovely student, and she's no longer, in our school. And I don't think it was necessarily I think it was a great thing that she was in our school, but it's just, I think, a good example of how, in all the, professional school development, training for headmasters and whatnot, they tell you focus on the mission and find the families that are on board with the mission. Families need to be there for the reason that your school exists. Mm-hmm. And if they're there for other reasons, it's going to be a short-lived relationship, or it's going to, it's even going to, implode. And so I do think, like, finding those families who are there because they want to raise Orthodox Christians, those are the families you have to find. And if they're there for other reasons, it's not going to be a stable, relationship.
So you've had some pressure to amend the vision. You've stood the ground, and it's paid off. You have a family now and an identity and stability because of that. If you had caved to this desire, to this idea, to this ostensibly really practically good thing to do, but not your principles, you would have had a lot more instability today. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, when you asked earlier if we had grown as a school, I thought the first thing I thought was quantity, no; quality, yes. Because and I think a big part of it is the families that are here now are very committed, and that makes that support and that stability of the school, I think, is critical.
I mean, forgive me, Father. I want to interject something here too. I kind of want to address our brother priests and clergymen, and I want to just kind of say this. I think, and I know it's a struggle, but I think it's a struggle that is imperative. And as a priest, and trying to really tend to the flock of Christ, having the school has been one of the best things for that, including not just the students, but it's helped me to shepherd the parents also, because a lot of things, a lot of places where there may be, there may be some ideas and some worldliness there that is, kind of problematic. And then that context of the school has allowed for discussion and prayer and interaction in ways to really help, develop their faith, their piety, strengthen them as
in other words, you're catechizing the parents through the kids. The kids are going home and saying, Dad, I learned about this today at school. We're supposed to do this or that, or the saint said this. And then I've seen that happen many times, actually, where the parents are led sometimes by the children. It's interesting to see that. Yeah.
But even in some of because this is one of the key things too. And again, I feel like maybe if I said this before earlier in the conversation, forgive me. I'm just going to repeat it again because I think it's important. It's learning to not shy away from those difficult things. See, part of the problem is that people want to build out the school environment, the school culture, just like they want to build out their lives and make everything soft and easy, with no rough edges, with no conflict. And the problem with that is there's no growth. And so one of the things is learning to really lean into these, butting of the heads or the kind of rubbing of the shoulders that will happen. And that's also that's almost more what I'm talking about. Your example is true and good, Father Peter, but I'm even talking about some of these things where, like, well, I don't know about this, I don't know about that. But see, getting into that with the parents actually produces relationship, and it opens up things for greater pastoral relationships. It opens up opportunities for greater growth for the parents, for myself, and I think this is an invaluable part of it, because again, the dichotomy is removed. We aren't just talking about, kind of Jimmy and Janie on certain hours of the week. We're talking about, as a family, what's going on, right? And so I can't say enough about that. And that alone is enough for a priest, my brothers, for you to really put the effort into developing a school to whatever degree. And even if it's a co-op, really, but being involved with it, being involved in the formation, being involved in the life of it, informing it, participating in it, supporting it, developing it. All of these things are absolutely beneficial and key to this health. One of the biggest problems, I think, also that we face with these situations is that priests can sometimes be worried about no one wants to step on toes, especially, in this day and age. You have such, unfortunately, a spectrum of ideas and beliefs on things. But I would just encourage everyone that the education, the forming of the souls of children is integral to the forming of the life of a family, because what's going on with the kid carries into the family. It affects the dynamic of the family, and the dynamic of the family affects the dynamic of the parish, right? The parish is, sums comprised of the parts of families. Those small home churches come together into the parish, forming the ecclesia. And what is going on in the minds and the hearts of the kids absolutely affects the environment of the parish, of the home, which affects the parish. So that's another reason why these dichotomies, beginning to see where they exist, and with the help of the Holy Spirit, kind of massaging them out, so that just like in our life as Orthodox Christians, we don't want our spiritual life to be relegated to, just book studies and going to liturgy on Sunday and Vespers on Wednesday. We want our Orthodox life to be integral to how we see everything: our economics, our diet, what we're doing with our bodies, how we spend our entertainment. All those things want to be informed. And that's really what we're trying to aim for with the school, is to really have the whole person informed in such a way that Christ is the lens by which they see everything.
Right. So you've got a page here on the website dedicated to spiritual life. Tell me a little about this. This is a part of the school. This is not part of the parish. This is a part of the school. So from the get-go, people who come to the school, they're coming for this in part. Is that correct?
Yes.
And how would you, so you got liturgy, catechism, faith integration, prayer, service projects.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little about these.
So as Father Turbo mentioned earlier, the school liturgy happens on Wednesdays, and we call it the school liturgy. It's open to all the parishioners. Many parishioners come, beyond just the families of the students, but the focus is allowing the students to serve in unique ways and to participate. And so we have, a large number of the students singing in the choir. We have, students reading the epistle reading, serving in the altar. And so it's, it's a chance for them to really just learn how to worship by worshiping. So,
okay.
Catechism happens on Wednesdays as well. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
So catechism happens on Wednesdays as well. Father Turbo teaches catechism to the upper school students. And then this past year we did Sister Glycaria, that one of the nuns taught some catechism to some of the younger students. And Papandia Juliana teaches. We came up with a new name for her class. It's called I think we're gonna call it Culinary Catechism. And she takes the kids into the kitchen, and they make various pastries and things like that, but tied into it the life of a saint or a feast of the church. And so
nice.
But
so do you have a systematic catechism, Father, or do you just kind of hit everything listed here: saints, scripture, church history, spiritual life, liturgical doctrine. Do you do that on your own? You create it as you go, or do you have something you're following?
I do both, and that's what I mean by that flexibility. I'll have a theme that I'll run with, but there's weeks, Father will I'll see an issue, let's say, maybe something's going around a conversation, and I'll start addressing it, and we'll talk about it, and we'll go through the fathers, we'll go through the scriptures, right? So yes, teach them the scriptures, going through the creed, systematically the creed. I've done on that, and I do all that, but I'm always looking for that opportunity, because if I can set aside my lesson plan, let's say, and engage all of them in conversation, that's a great day. I would much rather be speaking to them about prayer rules, about penances, about what sexuality, right? Because I'm the one that should be talking to them about it. If they have these questions, I want them having that discussion in the context of, well, this is what the church teaches. This is what the scripture says, right? So if I catch wind of something coming up, and this is part of it, having a relationship with the elders and with all of them in such a way that they're not scared to ask me those questions.
So what would you say to somebody who says, Father, it's not right. Really, the parents should be the main catechist in the kid's life. The school shouldn't be doing this. Okay, maybe the people in your parish, they expect you as a priest and they want you as a priest, but generally schools should not be involved in that kind of discussion with sexual, all these sensitive issues. That should be a parent to student only, because there are those people who believe that. What do you say to that?
Sure. And I absolutely honor that. And one of the things, maybe to a fault, is I'm very keen on challenging the kids to say, hey, talk to your parents and tell your parents to talk to me, and really, engaging that and not shying away from it.
Do you have a lot of work to talk to the parents? Say, look, I'm going to talk about this sensitive issue, or I talked about it last week. I want you to know this is what we're dealing with. Or
I make a point. If something sensitive does come up, which doesn't come up often, but when sensitive things have come up, I have made a point to say, okay, hey, this was talked about this week, or your daughter asked about this or that, this is one of those issues that had come up a couple years ago, and it wasn't in the context of catechism, but it was in the context of one of the teachers was asked a question by one of the students about feminine hygiene, and she addressed it personally with that young lady, but it was within the earshot of others. And so what was done? Well, that teacher then made the point to address and say, hey, this conversation, your child was privy to this. It wasn't aimed at them, but they were privy to this conversation. And so opening that up for discussion, that's how you have to go about those things. Because the reality is, this is part of the problem. When you try to curate something for the sake of not wanting to be uncomfortable, all you're going to do is actually make the problem worse. So the best thing from my perspective is to really be respectful, always engage the parents, always let the parents know what's going on. And if you know something ahead of time, you absolutely have to, kind of let them know and give them the opportunity to opt out. But as a priest, especially, this isn't, again, the context is I'm not fishing for something. If something comes up in the midst of it, I'm not going to give them a platitude and say, kind of send them away. I'm going to tell them what the church teaches, and how that they can address it, and then they need to inform their parents.
So tell me, Adam, a little bit about this faith integration. No subject can be adequately taught apart from the light of Christ. Each subject, from science to mathematics to literature, offers a unique opportunity to know the creator of all things. I don't know if you said you saw our discussion with Mark Tarpley last week. We actually talked about this, and he had a great answer to that. That, properly understood, mathematics, for instance, is one of the things where you can see the greatness and the order and all these things, as God as creator is imprinted all over creation, et cetera. Is that what that means, or is there something else that you're trying to say here?
Yeah, I think that's a great example. I think, other examples that would come to mind would be, teaching history as, is always there's so much you can select from history, and we want to emphasize the story of the church and of God's people, as part of world history. So, which is, I think back to when I was a philosophy major in college, and we started with Plato and Aristotle, and then we jumped over about, 2000 years and landed on Descartes. And it wasn't until much later I realized, wait, all the stuff they jumped over was, like the Christian philosophers, it's like it just sort of evaporates from the story. And so in many ways, it's not really telling like a different version of history. I just think of it as telling the true version of history, which includes, the story of
which includes there is no such thing as a Byzantine.
Right. That's right.
Never has been, never will be.
Rome.
We have Romans. We have continuity from. Sorry, that's one of my pet peeves. All right, so what about this down here? Every morning, Father, prayer with the students and a short reflection. What is that prayer? Is that just like the book morning prayers, or is that like a mini orthros, or what are you doing?
Yeah, just this morning prayers, Trisagion, and then depending on what season we're in, we pray the Troparion for the school, the Troparion for the Feast of Transfiguration, go through the Creed, we pray the Creed, and then, if we're in the Paschal season, the appropriate prayers, and then the reflection. And that time actually is, I think, also very integral because it, sets the tone for the day. And sets the tone of the day for me, to be honest, so.
You're looking forward to it.
I'm looking forward to it.
I felt the same way when I was the headmaster. We would do the prayers, and then we would go in and we'd have the whole school gathered and I'd present the life of the saint for the day. So we would have the hymnography, geography, timeline. It'd be a kind of a spherical approach to the life of the saint. I was doing catechism through the life of the saint every day. I loved it. And when I had to leave, it was one of the things I missed most. And in fact, I'll take the opportunity to say, God willing, we're going to be doing this starting in September. We haven't announced it, so it may change, but I hope not. We're going to start doing a daily life of the saint on Orthodox Ethos, just like I was doing back in the day in the school, where we're going to have a very comprehensive 30-minute, use all the technology I got at my disposal, geography, Google Earth, timelines, everything. I think one of the most important things, it's just my little plug here, and I don't know what you all do, and I'm sure it's probably something similar, but is that kids today, if you just sit there and say, here's the life of the saint, you just read, from the prologue, it's like 3-4 paragraphs, usually 5. It's very hard for them to understand the context where that saint lived. They cannot relate. It becomes almost like the same life sometimes if you're not paying attention to details. There's a certain hagiographical, form that all the lives take. They're not biographies. They're focused on the virtues. But for today's ahistorical, lack of geographical knowledge, I mean, Americans don't even know where places where we're bombing, every year. They don't even know where that is. So it's really essential for Americans, especially, to learn where, when, and, concrete. And this shows the incarnation throughout all the ages, right? The church is the continuation of the incarnation. So we're going to start doing that, God willing, in the fall. We're going to open up an educational portal, something like an online school, but just very, very focused on catechism, hopefully to help a lot of those homeschoolers out there who maybe can't do that, don't want to do that, whatever. But you just touched the nerve with me that sets the tone of the day. I can't agree more. I think it's really important to start the day out focusing on not just praying, but focusing on the lives of the saints and the life of the church.
Well, one of the things for me, Father, is, and this is just kind of like my, at least I see it as my wheelhouse, is I really try to make a point to bring forward human decency. This is, Blessed Seraphim Rose, in this, as you're familiar with, in his life and works, and speaking about the reality of the temperament of people today. And, he's speaking, even though it was then, it still applies to us now. But there's some basic things that I think people overlook. And this is getting back to, again, why an Orthodox school just isn't about giving, quote unquote, Orthodox flavored information. That's not it, right? So, maybe sometimes you're not ready to read, you know, the discourses, you know, of Saint Simeon. Okay, but maybe we can get you something through some Dickens, right? And so I think this is important to understand in regards to the formation, because, for instance, in these morning reflections, you know, I'll comment on the saint of the day. I will do that, or I'll comment on the feast of the day, but I'll try to find where they need to be encouraged in virtue. So, for instance, if I'm not in the life of the kids, then it just becomes some kind of abstract moralistic teaching that I'm trying to drop on them.
Yeah.
But because they're my kids, I know them. I know where they're not sharing. I know where they're maybe gossiping. I know, you know what I mean? And so I'm able, with the help of the Holy Spirit, to really try to, you know, push and form and shape the reflection in such a way to encourage them to patience, to humility, you see, and make it in a way that they're looking at each other and going like, okay, right, this is me, because it's so important to extrapolate, right, the virtue and prepare it for the child. I'm a big fan, and people need to understand, and again, forgive me but this doesn't just apply to priests, it applies to parents, educators. One of the problems people have is, you know, they get lazy and they look at things like microwave food. So if I just have the kind of idea, the topic, and I just kind of put it out there, zap it, and just serve it to the kid, that'll be fine. When in reality is, you know, I don't like Papadia. She doesn't come and just come home and just throw raw chicken on the table and say bon appetit, right? You get the chicken, you prep it, you cut it, you season it, you cook it, you set the table, you got, you know, the plates, the forks, maybe a runner's on the table, maybe maybe some flowers or something. You set the table to have a meal.
If you're Greek, you got feta cheese on the table.
Hey, in here in Missouri, maybe you got cornbread. But the point being, right? You wanna set the table, and I think that's another way of kind of looking at, you know, the ethos and the approach for the school for us here is like, how are we setting the table so that the kids can eat? And also too, hey, listen, if I made a great T-bone, right? I got a 3-year-old kid. You know, I'm not handing the kid, you know, the sharpest, you know, cutlery. I'm going to cut it up for him in these bite sizes. And I want to do that because I want him to enjoy the steak with the rest of us, but he's not going to be able to get it the same way we all do.
It's so obvious in these, when you give these examples, so obvious, but we don't oftentimes make that the same as apply. That's a great example. Apply that in the spiritual realm or in the pedagogical realm. Yeah. We're looking at the page for homeschoolers. You got a page dedicated to homeschoolers. Tell me about this, because I know other schools are trying to integrate homeschoolers and make that available to them. And sometimes it's successful, sometimes it's not. What's your experience and what are you offering there to the homeschoolers?
Sure. Can I say one last thing about the previous topic, prayer, and then I'll answer your question. So I just want to add one thing about prayer in school, because, you know, there's a little thing on that last page about praying before lessons. And it might seem like a really small thing. Like, well, of course you pray before a class, you know, you pray before and after a meal. There's a prayer that Father Porfirio shared with me that I've continued to use over the years. The prayer of a student: "O most good Lord, send down upon us the grace of thy Holy Spirit, who grants us gifts and strengthens the powers of our souls, so that by attending the teaching given us, we may grow to the glory of thee, our Creator, to the comfort of our parents, to the service of the church and our native land." And there's just something about that prayer that I think like perfectly encapsulates, this is why we're showing up for class. And it's not about us, you know. And if there's one message I just want my students to get at every class is like, you know, because I think this is just the perennial temptation of a student is like, what am I going to do with this? And the answer is, you know, how is this going to like shape you to serve others, to glorify God, to, you know, serve your nation? And if that's not the question that we're asking, you know, and so by, you know, I think that prayer is just like constant reminder of the purpose. So I just wanted to
absolutely
toss that in.
That's a great point, especially in America and in the land of individualism, where it's not even. I think it's a no-brainer in the old world. When I lived in Greece for almost 20 years in a village for about 12, and so nobody had to say, well, this is because we're part of this community called this village or called the Orthodox Church. It's very basic. It's very communal oriented society. I think all the old world is. And so you have to, in America, you're going against the grain of this thing. It's all about me and what you're giving me. It's like very egotistical and individualistic. So I like that. I appreciate that. Yeah. Tell me about the homeschooling work that you're doing. How do you integrate it?
Yeah. So the Wednesday liturgy, I think, is the key time that it makes it really easy for homeschooling families to get involved. And, I think it's important for them to have the opportunity to attend catechism. So maybe if you think of it, like a lot of times a parish will host a homeschooling co-op. So Wednesdays are the days where, it's most conducive for those families to attend. As far as offering the a la carte classes, this would be the first year that we really attempted to do that, and it really is just kind of based on what the need is from the homeschooler. So we have a small school, which means that we can be pretty flexible. And so I would just had a family in my office the other day who said, well, we want to participate, but we really kind of want to do this at home. And so, there's just kind of like working through the process of how can we serve you? And it really just kind of goes back to this idea that we're a parish school, within the context of a parish, it may not be the best thing for every family to send their kids to the parish school. And I just think we have to be really okay with that, and then figure out, okay, how do we support these families where they are? So that's kind of what this page is about. Summer classes, in fact, right here in this room where I'm sitting is generally on Tuesdays we would be having a summer ballet class. Our Greek teacher Peter Bradshaw is offering an ancient Greek course over the summer for adults, and then I continue to help homeschooling families just kind of on a sort of one-on-one basis with some advising services.
So one of the biggest problems for a lot of schools is just making it financially. I know that some of them have to end up closing because they don't have the resources. Some of them are really top heavy with lots of teachers and not a lot of kids, and so it really drags on the financial ability. The kids don't have a lot of money to give. How are you all dealing with this?
Yeah. So one of the things that, and I want to say, I've received a lot of help and input and advice from the Herzog Foundation, the Stanley Herzog Foundation, which is here in Kansas City, and they offer training for heads of school leaders, board members, teachers. And Stanley Herzog, who lived here in the area, passed away a few years ago and left $400 million to help start Christian schools. And so they've channeled a lot of that into essentially like free resources for school leaders. And so one of the things I've learned through taking some of their workshops and conferences is that one of the things schools mistakenly try to do is to price the tuition low so as to make it affordable for the families. And they really urge us to say, no, you have to charge what it costs, not what you want it to cost, to do to have the school. And then use financial aid, need-based financial aid to subsidize that. And so, we set our tuition what it needs to be to pay our teachers, and to pay for all the things that go along with that. And then each year we host a fundraiser, which is called the St. Nicholas Scholarship Fund. And so, private donors and grandparents and, families come together and raise funds to be able to kind of fill in the gap for families. And so we have a third-party system which essentially assesses families' needs, and then we're able to, and thanks be to God, we've been able to offer what families need, the last several years.
So in the parish obviously supports it a good deal, or is it separate, totally separate economically?
The parish is supportive, and it's, and I would say part of the problem is that this dichotomy. And I would encourage everyone, and especially my brother priest, it's something that what greater ministry outside of what we offer liturgically and sacramentally, this is the ministry, to really form the education of children. So absolutely, it's been imperative for me to get the school, the parish, to really invest and support the school. That's been one of the biggest things from the get-go. I've been very passionate, or adamant about it. So,
and just as a not small thing is that the building that we use is parish property. So I would just say, to those parishes that might be considering starting a school, it's amazing what you can do with a little extra space during, unused space during the week.
So you also have this enrichment, and that's really phenomenal. I think a lot of people would like to see this, although it seems to be, in my experience, seems like a mountain to people. How did you get up this mountain and make it real? So did you have something that really helped you to make it real, that you had the skills in the parish, or was it something that outside the parish you brought in to be able to give these practical teaching lessons?
I was personally inspired. Let me see. I think I actually have this book over here. I was inspired by this book that I read a few years ago called Common Arts Education by Christopher Hall, and he talks about the centrality of teaching these these skills that have kind of gone by the wayside, and a lot of a lot of kids don't learn. And one of the points that he makes is that there are people around you who have these skills and who can teach them. You just don't know who they are. So he made the recommendation, we'll just send out a survey to your whole community, and it's like, you have this skill that maybe people knew about, but not all of us knew about, that you are an expert at crocheting or or drawing or cooking or whatever it is. And we're blessed to have the George Washington Carver Farm, and so there's all these community members who have so much to offer. We even had a programming apprenticeship a couple of years ago, because one of our parishioners, who's a coder, took one of our high school students under his wing and taught him coding for a year. So it really is just about connecting the skills that are already there with the students.
Mm-hmm. So what are we looking at here? What are these? We got sewing. This looks like the farm, maybe.
That's right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then here's the basketball court. You got a basketball court out back or something?
They're playing tetherball.
That's fantastic. So everybody can see. I want to make sure everybody can see on the screen. Let me get it on the screen. The web address we got here, and people want to go and visit, check it out, and learn more about the school. MountTaborSchool.org about. Any last thoughts or comments or anything else you want to point out to people?
I just want to say one last thing. Again, thank you, Father Peter, for the opportunity to speak about this. But I just want, for those of you who don't understand, we're in Kansas City. We're on the east side of Kansas City. So I know for a fact there's people who are thinking, well, I couldn't do that, this and that. And there's no hyperbole when I say this. If we can do it in our parish, you can do it. Is that like we? If I mean that on every level, I mean that economically. I mean that on every level. If we can do it, you can do it. We are we come from humble beginnings.
You guys are in the hood, right?
We're in the hood. So that I think that's part of the thing is you have to understand, and this is the same thing in spiritual life. I tell people all this all the time. You know this well, Father Peter. It's not a matter of you can't do it; it's you don't want to do it. And
priorities, hierarchy. What do we really want to do?
Yep,
absolutely.
Well, one thing I might just add, Father Peter, is we've been working on starting a kind of a new initiative, and it's not really a new initiative. It's more of just putting a name on some things that we've already been doing, and we're calling it the Porphyrios Institute. And I've been working with other Orthodox parishes across the country through the Herzog Foundation's program called School Box. And essentially what it is it's a platform that has kind of streaming courses that teach you step by step how to start a school. And then they will also pay me to help mentor the whoever is, helping, leading the charge and starting the school. And it's a phenomenal program. It's a phenomenal resource. But as I've gotten into that work, I've just realized like how many needs are out there. We also started this year a teaching apprenticeship program. So we had a student teacher this year who graduated from St. John's College and is wanting to, learn how to teach in this kind of Orthodox school context. And so this Porphyrios Institute is kind of a new initiative named after, of course, St. Porphyrios and my teaching mentor, Father Porphyrios, to help with the development of Orthodox parish schools.
So it's got a website.
And there's a link that I sent to your assistant.
Okay, so if I were to bring it up on the screen here, Porphyrios, anybody, you got it for me, Justin? Let's see if we can get it up. Hang on. Coming up. We'll get it up on the screen
and
here.
So while that's coming up, I just want to say, and again, this is important because this isn't just about Kansas City. I really strongly believe this is about, the future of the church in the States. And I would just really encourage everyone, please, reach out to Adam, because this is the thing, we really shouldn't look at ourselves as kind of individual cells siloed away. We're the body of Christ, and we need to, cooperate. Everyone's doing their part. Father Peter's hosting this on his platform. He's hosting the discussion about Orthodox education. We're sharing what we've learned, and we need to really kind of move in such a way we're not just looking competitively at each other, but looking how can we all help each other as the body of Christ in the States here, because it's imperative that we, the future of the church is Orthodox Christians who are formed loving Christ and the tradition of the church. So reach out to Adam and please, get the help and look around, because this is what it's going to take. It isn't just about kind of like, pulling up your idea and trying to reinvent the wheel. And I think that's really important. That's why I think this is a great discussion, Father, because you share what you got, and it's like that stone soup, almost, if you will, you kind of put your little bit in, and then soon, everybody's eating. So.
Fantastic. So I didn't even realize we had questions here. Let me see if we can get some questions. So, okay, here we have the donorbox.org Porphyrios Institute. Let me see if I can get it up, because I'm going to have to type it out here. 1 second. I want to get it on the screen for people. Donorbox. Is that a? Let me think here. Let me see. It's all one word. Okay. Donorbox.org. Is this you're involved in this directly?
This is kind of a sub ministry of our school, of Mount Tabor School. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so are you the kind of founder of this, or how would you describe it?
Yeah. Correct.
Okay. Yeah. It's taking me forever, but it's Porphyrios-Institute. All right, I want to get it up here. Porphyrios. And so DonorBox is something else?
It's a platform.
It's a platform.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Somehow I got this wrong. DonorBox Porphyrios.inst. Oh, that's what the problem is. Let's see. Let me see. We're getting it now. Still not. Institute.org. What am I doing wrong? That's what I wanted. I wanted it here, so I can just copy paste. There you go. And now we're going to get it on the screen. All right, so let's bring it up. And this is it. Porphyrios Institute, correct? Tell me if I'm wrong. We got it?
There you go. Yep.
Okay. So tell us again, this is a fundraising. No, this is a fundraising, or what? Tell me what.
Yeah,
what we're looking at.
so this is our fundraising site. This is the link that I shared, and so the whole spirit of it is that you know every day I hear from from parishes across the country that are trying to start schools and are trying to figure out how to do it. And I would say the biggest challenge is just the leadership. How does one, and even talking with Father Turbo and with Ian Flowers and those who are kind of on the ground floor with Mount Tabor School, just having a checklist and getting organized and knowing like, okay, here are the concrete steps we need to take. How do we form a board? How do we market the school? How do we, how do we do the fundraising? How do we hire teachers? Where do you find teachers? They're just all these questions that, and I spend, multiple sessions every week with people across the country who are trying to figure all of this out. And so, there's some unique demands in an Orthodox context. And so what I'm trying to do is help parishes through this process. And it's just a multifaceted thing. It's like, where are the Orthodox teachers? Well, we have to grow and cultivate them. And, where are the leaders? And of course, I've been in contact with many leaders of schools across the country, but we're really just in the beginning stages of even like connecting and networking with one another. And, what is your policy and your handbook on this topic or that topic? Then of course you have, the homeschooling families who are out there trying to basically start their own little schools in their houses and how to do that. And so just kind of collecting a lot of these needs together under this vision for, starting helping to grow Orthodox K-12 education.
Yeah, go ahead. I was going to say, do you foresee a gathering eventually, like we all get together in one place face to face, or is this going to be mostly via internet?
I've heard talk about that, but I don't have any specific plans at the moment, but I think it would be a wonderful thing to do. And I've heard people talk for years about an Orthodox, and there's probably been some attempts at that, but those are all the kinds of things that require planning, but a conference I think would be fantastic.
But really what you're looking at there is essentially Adam's been consulting, and I've been promoting his consultation services to people, because the reality is that priests are excited and priests catch a vision. Parish leaders catch a vision, families catch a vision, and catching a vision is absolutely necessary. But you have to have firewood, not just a spark, and you have to have a fire pit so that the wood and the fire that you're going to build doesn't just spill out everywhere. And so the nuts and bolts are absolutely imperative. You can't have a kite without a string. And so essentially what this is really trying to develop this other aspect, which is about trying to help establish through consultation and addressing the nuts and bolts questions that people have and giving them nuts and bolts answers on how to basically facilitate this in their context, because that's part of the flexibility. Flexibility can't just be flim flam. You need to have some understanding that, if you have muscle but no bones, you got a problem. And so what he's talking about, this is about consultation and helping to really come in, look at your situation, look at your community, look at, your resources, look at what's going on, how far are you in your development of understanding where you're at, and then coming in and giving that guidance, coaching, addressing, and looking to see the questions that you're not asking. Because that's the biggest problem, is not knowing the question, because you don't know what you don't know. And so coming in and asking and showing someone, these are the questions you aren't asking. And that's the thing. See, because this is what people don't understand also. One of the reasons why you look to people who have done the thing is because you don't know what you don't know. And so there was so much that we didn't know. And by the grace of God, we've been able to, kind of field those questions through experience. And so there's no point in having to repeat that if you don't have to. And that's one of the biggest things I can't stress enough. And that's why having someone to consult is really important.
Great. Wonderful. Well, I hope people reach out to this. You have got the website there, donorbox.org, profilius.institute. All of you out here who have need or desire to network, you've got the link. Let's go to the questions and try to get through some questions fairly quickly. For those who may be habitually misusing the quote from Romans, what does that actually refer to? That there should be no Greeks or what? Okay, this is kind of off topic. Let me see. The preacher. I'm going to go to questions that have to do with our topic today. Hello from Pennsylvania. What curriculum do you recommend for Orthodox homeschoolers? Use the Mennonite curriculum for children who are now grown. Concerned for future grandchildren. Thank you. What do you think, Adam?
What curriculum to recommend? There's so much out there. I mean, I think probably the best thing you can do is like find other, homeschooling families that are, find out what they're using. At Mount Tabor School, we use a lot of Memoria Press, and we've just found that it's very user friendly. But we don't use one curriculum. I mean, we kind of pick and choose. There's online options like St. Raphael School, Classical Learning Resource Center, St. Athanasius Academy. So there's all those, online options as well.
Okay, so because there's no Orthodox curriculum out of the box ready to go, you got to pick and choose, basically.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, but one of the beauties of homeschooling is that maybe not even every kid uses the same the curriculum. One might fit one, so that you have a lot of flexibility built into homeschooling. You don't want to change things too often because there's the continuity problem. But there's lots of good like review sites and that kind of thing out there.
Mm-hmm. Let's see, when starting a school or co-op.
Everyone comes to the project with different experiences, assumptions, and expectations. Do you have discussions among parents and teachers to try to get most people on the same page? What do you do to get everybody on the same page, basically? How do you approach that? Just a lot of discussions, or as we said earlier, we got a leader and we lay it down?
I mean, I would say, Adam's going to have a different answer that will be complimentary, I'm sure. But I would say this is where the priest is really important. I mean, it's really important that the priest kind of leads the way for the people because, again, homeschooling is great. I've done it longer than most. But one of the problems is that it can, if you don't see some of these blind spots, it can foment the wrong type of like individualism that gets you not moving in sync with your community, but rather kind of like away from. So this is where I really strongly, from experience, encourage these communities, co-ops, and really priests to be involved. This is not something where the priest can say like, oh, the moms will do that. This is not that's not the thing. You're setting yourself up for some problems, and you're doing a disservice, in my honest, opinion, my humble opinion. You're doing a disservice to your people. This doesn't mean you have to micromanage everything, but you definitely have to give leadership and guidance to the families so that they can be moving.
What if they say, well, that's great, but my priest really doesn't have the leadership skills, or he's not interested, doesn't have a vision, and we have a school, the previous priest started it, and it's just, I think there's a variety of circumstances where, unfortunately, there's not a lot of leadership.
Well, forgive me, but I think this is also one of the reasons why the Porphyrius Institute, and really understanding at the very least, Adam's offering some services for consultation, but they can reach out to you, Father Peter. I mean, I'm open to field questions.
Yeah.
But the problem is priests, I don't really want to get in someone's backyard, right? But I would just say, here's a resource to speak with someone, namely Adam, to try to get some direction. But before you even reach out to Adam, pray the Akathist to the three holy hierarchs. Pray the Akathist to St. John Damascene. Pray to these great educators and ask for some guidance. first and foremost, and then, do the practical steps of knocking on doors and getting some advice.
Okay. Some people will say we should keep our kids in the public schools to be a light in the world. I don't think it's children's job to save other kids. They are still being formed. Okay. So kind of a statement question. Anything you want to add to that?
I for the most part, I really agree with that. And, I don't want to get into, a whole debate about it personally, but I really question that sentiment. Because I'm saying just in general, forgive me for speaking in generalities, but I have found that people, and I've known people who have made that argument, and they've usually been people and women who don't have families, don't have their own kids. Forgive me. I have found that to come from people who tend to be ideologues. I have not really heard that argument from people who have, children. Forgive me. This has just been my experience.
Yeah. Okay. Jump in if you want, Adam. Otherwise, we're moving on. As Orthodox Christians, it is unwise to foster children. Is unwise to foster children since we can't get them baptized and raise them. Is it unwise to foster children since we can't get them baptized and raise them as Orthodox Christians? Should Orthodox Christians foster children? If so, how do we teach them?
I know I'm talking a lot here. Forgive me, but I'm very passionate about this also. I think it's a travesty that we don't have more Christians, more Orthodox Christians adopting and fostering children. I think that when you look at Rome, one of the kind of unspoken ways that the church grew in the ancient times was that the Christians rescued the children from exposure and took them in as their own. And that was a way of turning the hearts. It wasn't done to necessarily turn the hearts. It was done because it was the Christian thing to do. But I think that is one of those lost kind of ways in which we as the people of God really are the salt and light in the world. See, to me, that's the antidote to that other question of like sending your kids to public school to like prove some ideological point. This is the antidote to that. We should be fostering and planting seeds and raising these children and rescuing them from the mouth of the beast. Listen, Adam brought up earlier this situation where there's this young child whose mother was a Wiccan priestess. I would have done that over again. I'm glad for it because that young girl, we taught her the sign of the cross. We taught her the Our Father, and that will not leave her. It's right. So I believe
you planted a seed, and when she grows up, she might come back to that and say,
correct.
I remember those days. They were beautiful days. My soul was at peace. Yeah.
Correct. Absolutely. Correct. So to wrap it up on that, we need more. If we need more families and couples, especially, forgive me, I'm just going to say this too. If you have been given the cross of infertility, well, it might be an open door to really take the cross of this ministry because it's one that's really needed.
Mm-hmm. So, Father, for a minute, I'm going to have to cover you up because this is a massive text, but we'll be right back. There's no way.
No one's going to mind, Father.
I'm trying to figure out a way to put this text on the screen without covering you, but I don't think there is. Otherwise, yeah, just hang on one second. Let's read this. Thank you so much for talking about this. I just finished Father Peter's book, and it articulates so many things I have thought and couldn't articulate well. Everyone needs to read this and understand these things. After homeschooling for over 20 years, you give me hope for my grandchildren. Thank you. Okay, well, so that wasn't even a question. Sorry, I didn't realize it.
It's worth it.
So let me, just because people know that what we're talking about, this book here just came out, Formation and Love of Truth, Principles of Orthodox Education from Uncle Mountain Press. So if people are interested, they can go to Uncle Mountain Press and check it out. Welcome to Wayne Rogers. Glad you joined the YouTube channel. Is there any type of physical fitness or competition included into the model, or is it geared towards individual study? All right, so physical fitness or competition. Question from Joe Ablan I guess Adam probably could answer this quickly for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot that we could talk about there about the importance of physical fitness. I mean, in the classical tradition, starting with martial arts and, it's kind of like the basis for any kind of formation. But I mean, just the way it works out at Mount Tabor School. I mean, we have a PE class for the upper school students, and then other ways for them to be kind of physically engaged, whether it's dance, or we have a rock climbing club that happens in the middle of the school year in the winter when they go to the gym during the cold months. But like kind of the traditional sports can be a challenge in a small school, so you have to figure out ways to be able to do things that are maybe a little bit off the beaten path. It can be done in smaller groups, but it's critical. You have to do it, and I think we could, we continue to try to improve our program as well.
Do you experience an increase of spiritual attacks around starting the school? That's kind of a no-brainer, right? Of course.
That quote from Saint Theophan about of all the holy works, the most holy is education of children. I before when I had the first inspiration, I went around to a couple older priests locally here, and one of the priests, when I had a kind of lunch with him, he sat down. I was telling him about the school, the idea for the school, and he was just like, "Good luck." He said one of the worst years of his life was trying to start a school. So this is a very common reality, because there's so much warfare, and again, if that's the case, if there's so much warfare around the formation of Christian, Orthodox Christian education, then what does that tell you about the inverse of it in regards of worldly education and the desires, the intents there?
Yeah. When we started the school down in Arizona, I mean, I didn't start it, but I came as the first headmaster. It was the most intense year of my life, probably, in terms of just intense spiritual warfare. And we got to the point where we were just standing. We had our mouth open most of the time, wondering what is going on right now.
Yeah.
It was amazing. Yeah. All right. So this is this year. We got this. What is the tuition like? Can the kids earn scholarships? Do you have any Orthodox corporate sponsors to help lower tuition?
Our tuition is it's right around 5,500, kind of right in the middle a year per student. That would be very much on the low side for private schools in Kansas City. But it also, remember, we have like the hybrid program. And so, that's part of the way that we make the finances work. But as I mentioned, we have the St. Nicholas Scholarship Fund, but then we also have a coffee roasting business called Scola Coffee. And Scola apparently is the Serbian word for school, but it also sounds like skull. And so our logo is a little skull sitting on top of some books. I think it might have some wings on it. I can't remember. But anyway, but we roast coffee beans. And so that, I guess, if you want to consider that a corporate sponsor, but in the sense that the question was probably intended, no, we have no corporate sponsors.
But if you want a sponsor, let us know.
I don't think there's a lot of corporate sponsors for guys in the hood, right? It's not, the guys in the hood are on their own most of the time. So we got a few more questions, but they're kind of off topic. Do we have time for those, or do we want to?
Actually, Father Peter, if you don't mind, there was a question a few minutes back that I meant to say something and I didn't quite get to it, but I think it was about like how families how to help families kind of bridge the gap, or like different opinions about education and that thing, and like coming together as a school. I can't remember the exact question, but one thing I've noticed in like working with other parishes and then also in our own parish is like, a hybrid school is somewhere kind of in this nether region between homeschooling and private schooling. And for a lot of the homeschooling families, it just feels a little bit too close to school. And for a lot of the kind of native schooling families, it feels a little too close to homeschooling. And so you feel like it's one of those things that I think is the best of both worlds. Mm-hmm. But I think from the beginning, it can feel like it's just tugging people in a direction. The homeschooling families, they're used to their freedom. They're used to picking their curriculum. In fact, the best part of, the mom's like month is when the the curriculum catalog comes and, you get to kind of look through it and stuff. And so it's like that whole aspect of it starts to feel like, okay, now I'm that part that I love, I'm giving up to a school, and then on the side of like the schooling families, many of them are going like, wait, I have to like help and contribute. It's not just like, you're not just going to do all of this for, so there's this kind of like middle ground where no one's quite comfortable. But I would just
that's
say
usually the royal path, right, Father? The royal path.
That's right.
That's the sweet spot. If you can get them
That's
all
the
right
sweet
there, where no one's
out of their comfort zones. You got to get out of the comfort zone, right? That's the perfect place. I love it. That's perfect. Yeah, I really liked it. We didn't do that model when I was doing it, but I've heard about it ever since. I thought this is the way to go. But there is a lot of pushback. Like you get pushback from 2 quarters instead of 1. If you went one or the other, you would be okay. Well, you would have your group that's very dedicated. But now you've got people who are basically having to compromise on both ends, and it's but it is the royal path. I think today, especially, it's good. So we have some off-topic questions, mainly for Father. So, Father, for the interest of time, let's just turn these things out as quickly as we can, because I don't want to. I like people asking questions, but they are a bit off topic. So this is Liam says, when Jesus says not to call your brother a fool, but also call the Pharisees fools, how do we find the balance while trying to imitate Christ?
You want me to take that one, Father?
Okay, well, I can try. I don't.
Listen,
go ahead. You talk.
Forgive me. The scripture says, a fool says in his heart there is no God. Yeah. So I'm just going to take a kind of low-level pastoral approach, and I would just say, it's not so much that you need to even be concerned with calling your brother a fool. Saint Nikolai again, Saint Nikolai of Lockridge, he talks about when you see your brother in a struggle, just imagine them being mauled by a tiger, and why wouldn't you want to rescue your brother? So, I think the thing is that when you're saying fool, what the Lord's trying to emphasize there is judgment. And so just really quick, we don't judge. We inspect fruit, absolutely. But what do you mean we don't judge? Well, this is what we mean. Christ is the judge. So if you see someone, let's say in gluttony, right? They're clearly eating a whole pizza by themselves, right? Okay, that's gluttony, right? He's not a power lifter, right? And even then it's not okay. So what do? Okay, yes, this is what's happening, but he's not a glutton. It's not for you to say this is what he will be forever. You leave that to Christ and you pray for your brother. You see the warning, you avoid that trap yourself, but we just have to be careful not to relegate people to judgment, saying this is what you are, this is what you will always be, and thereby putting yourself in the place of Christ. That's how I would answer it.
All right, let's go. I'm not even going to attempt. So Ben struggling with the thought that God does not tempt in the simplest form. If God does not tempt, why was the tree of knowledge of good and evil placed in the Garden of Eden? I think he's confusing the two there. They're not the same. Go ahead if you want to answer, but they're not the same. Like having that there is not therefore a temptation, and like he didn't like put them in the path and like make it difficult.
Right.
He had free will. He gave them everything they needed, but they had also to use that free will properly to grow in and be stabilized in synergy and communion, and to love and to have the hierarchy of love. So that's essential. Like you don't want to. The whole problem here is so many questions, Father. I don't know about you, but I get all these questions that center around the question of freedom. Basically, they can't get their head around freedom. It's the biggest problem in heterodoxy is, how do we make sense of freedom here with God's sovereignty? How do we make sense of freedom in terms of salvation? And they always trip on the question of freedom. If freedom goes, if the autoxousia in Greek, the term is essentially the self-authority. That's the term for what we call free will, but I think it's more accurate in Greek. If that goes, then we're no longer made in the image of God, and there's no such thing as love anymore without freedom.
Forgive me if I know you want to go, but I just think this is really pertinent, because I want to loop it back to the school. The thing about freedom and love is that's a big part of why you need to help to form the soul to know what is good. Because in the forming of the soul in instructing a soul of what is good, you're now actually ushering them into freedom. See, a soul that hasn't been formed, a soul that hasn't been given the means to discern the good and to know the good and to know the true and the beautiful, that's a soul that's relegated to slavery. That's a soul that's relegated to a life without that freedom that God, desires for his creation, for humanity. So that's why I would also kind of add to that,
Yes. Yes, this is a big topic. We're not going to go any further on it. One last question over here in Crowdcast. Orthodox schools are necessary, I think, because look what's going on in the church. There's a lot of compromise that's being made by certain people in certain quarters. More talk of rising of heresies. If we don't have Orthodox schools, basically the person's saying we've got problems coming in the future. But there's always been heresy, right? There's always been delusion. There's always been in the church, like among the Orthodox, there are people who rise up and teach heresy. So absolutely, it goes without saying that we need to train up the child so that it goes the way of the Lord. And so this is the great work of mothers and fathers first, and then educators in the parishes second, along with them. And good struggles to you, Father, and to Adam. We're so glad you joined us. Appreciate it. Forgive us for any of our shortcomings in terms of whatever the discussion didn't go as best as it could, but we think that we really liked the what you gave us today and what we learned, and seeing your example alone is going to be very inspirational for a lot of people out there. So thank you for the tireless efforts you put in, because you're not just working for your own parish, you're working for the whole church. We're all one body, and everybody helps everybody when they're struggling and they're making progress in building up the church. So thanks so much for joining us today, and good struggles.
Thank you, Father. Thank you.
Thank you, Father.
Yeah. Thank you for all of you who joined us. We got a big turnout today, even though we're in the middle of the day. It's first time we've done this time of the day podcast. We got a huge turnout, so that's what people love the topic. Let me just say one or two quick announcements before we check out. Again, for those who are interested in the book that's out from Orthodox from Uncle Mountain Press, just go to unclemountainpress.com. and you can learn more about the book, Formation in the Love of Truth. That is one of many books from Uncle Mountain Press. Join us, subscribe over there, get on the mailing list to learn about many books coming down. We've got about 15 books in process. Hopefully by the end of the year, most of those will be out and about circulating. So, and there'll be a number of books coming in the near future for educators. So besides this Formation in the Love of Truth, we're also looking to put out a curriculum, a lesson plans for the mystery of Christ. This is the thing we're doing every Thursday, teaching this phenomenal book from Mount Athos. It's in Greek. We're translating about 10 pages a week and presenting that online every Thursday. The mystery of Christ from the fathers at the Kili of the resurrection in Kapsala on Mount Athos. These are the same fathers who produced the life of St. Paisios and many other wonderful books. And this book is going to be published eventually by Uncle Mountain Press. But in the meantime, God willing, by September, we'll start putting out a lesson plan so you can teach the same material to your kids. We just think this is one of the best books we've ever seen or heard or read in any language in terms of the person of Christ and introducing and going deep into who is the person of Christ. Phenomenal material from the fathers and the Old Testament. So far, we're in about 120 pages in and talking all about the prophets of the Old Testament. That'll be coming out. We'll also have this, God willing, in the fall, this daily life of the saint. And we're working on a history, the Orthodox, I'm calling it, we don't have a title yet, but I'm calling it the Orthodox Story of the World. And that is a history for, like Susan Wise Bauer's 4 volumes, if you know it. We're going to do an Orthodox version of that, mainly for kids basically 5th to 8th or 6th to 9th grade. And it'll be the Orthodox version from the birth of Christ until the Great Schism, covering some really important historical moments. So from an Orthodox perspective, and there will be no use of the term Byzantine in the entire book. So no, I jest, but it will be the Orthodox proper understanding of history, and that'll be coming out probably early next year. And so Orthodox Ethos and Uncle Mountain Press working on those projects. But that's it for the announcements. We'll see you soon, I'm sure. Good struggles and a good
Thank
summer.
you, Father. Thank
All
you.
right. All right. We'll be in touch. God bless everybody, and see you soon.
Exuvimat